Paul, welcome back to the show. I don't think I've said that more than once before. You're the second guest to get a return invite, so welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
You were telling me you read a book about tool building. Tell me about it.
We wrote a blog post about this recently. Yeah. So I was actually so this is a bit of a long story, but I'm building a paint booth because I'm restoring a car at the moment. So you ever play like a
Sweet.
video game where like there's a main quest and then you go on a side quest and then you go on another side quest, right? So I'm restoring this 1960s MG and
Oh,
I'm doing all
nice.
the work myself. And as part
Oh,
of that, I'm going
wow.
to be painting it. So I decided to build a paint booth.
Of course you did.
And of course, right? That's what you do. And so
As you do.
the paint booth, the internal walls are made of steel. So I had to cut some steel. I had these steel sheets laying around, and I was working with my father-in-law, and we wanted to cut a straight line. So naturally, because I've done a lot of woodworking, I grab a piece of plywood that I had laying around and convert it into a quick little saw guide for sliding the saw. And he hadn't seen that before. But because I've done a lot of woodworking, it's just a very natural thing to, if you have a circular saw and you need to cut a straight line, you can look on YouTube, there's ways to create circular saw guides for it. And we use that all day to cut up the steel. And so it inspired writing this blog post where, because what I realized talking to some folks internally is that like woodworking has this special property to it, which is a lot of the tools that you use for woodworking are made of wood, right? So one of the first projects you might do is create a workbench or something out of wood. And you see the same with blacksmiths. So when you're learning to be a blacksmith, one of the first things you do is create a hammer, create a chisel, create tongs, right? The sort of special property that these crafts can create their own tools. And it occurred that programming is kind of unique in this way, right? Like engineers, other types of engineers, like bridge building engineers, don't kind of really do this to the degree that programmers do. We're kind of special amongst a lot of roles in that most of the tools we use on a daily basis are built by people like us, and there's some unique things to that. And so we're doing a lot of work in the platform engineering space at the moment, and platform engineering uh, is kind of the ultimate version of this, right? Like it's a team-based version of this, but it's
So
um,
wait, explain for those of our guests who are kind of non-engineering executives, what does that mean?
yeah. So if you're a CTO, you have this question of, I have 100 engineers. Are they being productive? Are they being effective? And one of the ways that you might find that they're not being all that productive or effective is because they're all sort of solving the same problems over and over again, right? So this team over here has a way of deploying stuff to production, and this team over here has a different way to do it. And they're both spending time maintaining and building these sort of internal tools and so on. Now we don't talk about developer productivity in the same way we might talk about other jobs and the productivity associated, because you can't measure engineering productivity anyway, really. It's more creative, and lines of code isn't a
No, it's
so
not. I mean, that's a great topic for us to dive into, but I'll let you keep going. We might come back to that one.
yeah. So I think the sort of innovation more recently has been the focus on developer experience as an alternative way of talking about this. So I guess the hypothesis would be, if we can set up our engineers so that their day-to-day toil of doing the engineering work is less, and they're just able to spend time writing code and building features that benefit our business, we can kind of imagine that will likely produce a more effective engineering team without a focus on productivity on itself. In fact, let's just focus on removing blockers and annoyances. So that's where developer experience comes in. And then part of the pursuit of developer experience becomes, well, like my example, I'm using my circular saw and it's going to wobble all over the place. But if I take 5 minutes to build a quick tool that will help me create straight lines, well, we do the same in software teams. And so the developer experience initiative becomes a platform engineering initiative, and then the focus becomes building this platform. But a little bit like the side quest problem, at some point the side quest becomes the quest,
The
right? And
quest.
so the
Well,
platform
in
team
fairness,
becomes the thing.
AWS was a side quest that became a billion-dollar business, right?
That's
In
the ultimate
fairness,
example. Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
ultimate side quest.
It is, yeah. I mean, you go back to the Jeff Bezos the leaked email, right, of like everything is going to be an API and teams are going to be decoupled from each other, which results in all of the internal tooling kind of being easily something they can make available for other people to use.
Yeah.
And so that happens across enterprise companies all the time, right? You end up with these platform teams. But I think, the tool building thing, I've definitely done woodworking projects where in order to improve the productivity of the actual project I'm working on, I'm going to go and spend 5 minutes creating a tool. That becomes 20 minutes creating the tool. That becomes the entire day creating the tool, to the point where I've lost the motivation for the main project I was working on because I'm so frustrated about how the tool building process has gone, right? And we see this, I think, with software platforms too, where the platform can sometimes become this all-consuming thing that ultimately doesn't get to the main benefit we were hoping for, which is a more engaged, productive, less blocked developer team.
Yeah, let me tell you a story that will probably get me in trouble should I
Please
still be
do.
working for Siemens. Um, so we wrote algorithms for Apple, Qualcomm, Honeywell, which basically did design for manufacturing, which is basically analysis of the electrical design and the physical design, meaning the layout. So I basically, I was the test, I was the gatekeeper for the next version of Snapdragon, right? That was the algorithms that I wrote.
Right.
And it would take us 3 to 4, sometimes 2 months, 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes 2 months to write these algorithms. And I must have written 50 to 100 of these algorithms, and it hit me. This is just a mathematical abstraction that I'm writing again and again and again every time. So it hit me that there's a mathematical abstraction that could be written, a tool, a layer, an API. And it hit me that that mathematical abstraction would take the time down. And I wasn't sure to how much. So I thought through it and I was like, in 80% of the times, what took up to 2 months would take 30 minutes. I
Wow.
went to engineering. They told me, Ari, that can't be done. I went to product management. Ari, that can't be done. I went to my boss. Ari, that can't be done. I said, okay, can I work on this? Like skunk works. I'll spend time on the weekends. I won't spend more than a couple hours a week on this. Sure,
Yeah.
go do it. It could be done. So then I come to my boss and like, give me a check. And he's like, do this. 5 lines of code, right? I just wrote the math, right? I wrote the equations up and it did what it was supposed to do because everything at the end of the day is just geometric math when it comes to this stuff, right? I write it up. He's like, Ari, you can't tell anybody you did this.
Why is
Why?
that? Yeah.
Well, we were a consulting business.
Right.
So now what took me months now takes me an hour. So what am I going to charge? Half an
Yeah,
hour?
what's the billable hours on that?
What's
Yeah.
the billable hours on that? So I was not allowed to tell anybody that I did this. In fact, he's probably going to curse at me if anybody hears this.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the lesson, right? Yeah, if you're being paid by the hour, maybe tool building isn't the best thing to
It's not the best thing to do.
go on to. Isn't that amazing that like you intuitively knew that a tool could be built to solve this problem though?
Look, even a monkey, if they did the same task 100 times, they would see patterns. So I don't think I'm much better than a monkey. Monkeys, by the way, they lick a piece of stick and they stick it in to get some ants. So even monkeys tool build. I have literally written 100 of these checks before these mathematical patterns emerged to me. I can't say that I looked at it the first one and I was like, yeah, no problem, I'll do this. So I wouldn't claim any kind of genius on my part. But yeah, I think that if you become an expert, you put in your 10,000 hours, right? Then things that the shortcuts that are apparent to that are not apparent to everybody suddenly become crystal clear to
Oh,
you.
for sure.
So there's something about that, right? It's the 10,000 hours is what got me there.
There is, but if let's say that you've spent 10,000 hours playing the piano, that doesn't mean you can build a piano, right? The skills
No,
required in learning to play a piano are not the skills required in building a piano. There's something unique, I think, about software and the crafts, but only some crafts too. I mean, sewing, for example, doesn't help you build too many tools, I think, to assist with
yeah,
sewing in the way that, say,
that's
woodworking
true.
or metalworking do. Yeah.
I mean, this is such a timely conversation because the world is changing.
Right.
And now, not only are we building, the stupid stuff that I did, right? Mathematical abstractions. I mean, probably any mathematician would have looked at what I did and be like, oh, all right, that's simple. What you did isn't that impressive. The problem was I was the only, aspiring mathematician in the group. That's why I saw it. But now what's happening is on a whole different level, right? Math and a little bit of neuroscience gave us neural networks. Neural networks in the combination with something called GAN, which is basically game theory of two agents fighting each other to get to efficiency, gave us generative. And then I don't know who it was, but somebody came and said, well, what if we gave it a hell of a lot of data? That gave us GPTs. And then I don't know what the next step was. Maybe you know this. I don't know. Somehow GPTs learned how to code. I guess they just trained them on code instead of language, but I'm not sure about
Mm.
what the answer to that is. Suddenly GPTs can code. They are now the ultimate coding tool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it, isn't it? So does vibe coding and really just, I mean, we've had this for a little while, right? If you think about Excel, a lot of people in a lot of business runs today on Excel because people have spotted, and these are people who haven't had like a programming background, right? They're not they wouldn't be fully able to build things, but Excel kind of gives them a bit of a starting point, at least, to build for certain types of workflows. And when we had this with Access, a little bit as well, right? How many doctors built their own Access databases and things. But yeah, we're probably at a new place where I
You're
think,
dating yourself, Paul, with
yeah,
access.
that's right. Well, there's something interesting in the history of software that I think is
Yeah.
worth studying, even if you weren't around.
Yes.
But yeah, certainly I think the AI tooling makes things accessible to people that otherwise wouldn't be. And you find this, I think, the debate around artists who spend a long time practicing the skills of being an artist in the pursuit of creating art or graphic design versus someone like me who just has never, I'm not the person that sits around sketching something all day, but I can kind of prompt an AI to create something that doesn't look too bad. And that's
Yeah.
quite empowering for someone who just hasn't had the
It is.
10,000 hours to put into learning that skill.
Yeah. I mean, this drives a very important, I think, question. Are engineers out of a job? Are artists out of a job? I have an answer. What's yours?
I've got a very contrarian view on this whole AI space, actually, that comes more of thinking from
If
like
it's contrarian, we
software
might actually
investing.
agree.
Yeah. I had this conversation with my daughter once around like what. So she's very artistic and she spent a lot of time. Some of her paintings are behind me, and so I think she's seen a lot of the things happening in the AI space and the art community's reaction to that. And we had this conversation around, like, I asked the question of, what do you think an artist does? And there's sort of two levels you can answer it, right? So there's a basic level of answering, which is they sort of
That's
wiggle
a
a brush.
beautiful question. I mean, that question is brilliant. I just love that you did that with your daughter.
Yeah, because the basic answer is they wiggle a brush on a canvas, right? And colors come out, which is the same if you said, what does a doctor do? The answer would be, well, they have their hands in blood and guts all day, and it's kind of like plumbing but grosser, is like that is a true answer to the question. Another true answer to the question of the doctor is, well, they save lives, right? And so the same job has two different answers to the question, one very high level, one very low level.
Yes.
The same is true, I think, in the art question. I think, artists challenge our conception of humanity and what goodness looks like and all of these things.
Yes. Thank you very much.
So, you know, can AI wiggle paint on a canvas as well as humans probably can? Yeah, probably imaginable they will. Can AI do that higher level function in the same way? Probably not. And so, but it might allow a whole set of people who haven't spent 10,000 hours learning certain artistic skills to express themselves. I think, a human creating very derivative art is probably having less artistic impact than someone who really is challenging how people conceive of humanity, even though they might have prompted an agent to do it. So I don't have a clear answer on it, but I don't think it's an answer that can
I
easily
think
be
it's the
dismissed.
perfect answer. I'll tell you why it's the perfect answer, because I see a lot of artists, copywriters. I was speaking to a very accomplished, acclaimed author the other day, and she was like, "Ari, I'm depressed. Like AI
Mm.
has taken my job and it's killed my industry." And like yourself, I said, "No, quite far from it." And I actually think that we are in front of 10 years of economic devastation, but then we're going to have a renaissance. Unfortunately, both of those things are going to happen. Why? Anybody who is not at the top of their game and is not going to be an early adopter of AI, there is a certain percentage of a chance that they will be impacted because their job will no longer exist in its current form or not at all and will be
Mm.
replaced with something else. So I think there's going to be cascading effects across industries. So I think it's going to be scary for a bit. I don't know if it's 10 years or 2 years or 5 years or 3 years. That's hard to say because all the numbers kind of, we don't know. We've lost our ability to create time predictions in this age. So I don't know really if it's going to be 2 years or 10 years. I hope obviously that this economic devastation will be time limited. But what I think is going to happen after that is going to be a renaissance. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think we'll see the renaissance very early in the game, but in small scale. And then that renaissance will roll out to the general public. And that renaissance is a derivative of what you're saying. It's that anybody can cook, right? It's the Gustavo. Anybody
Yeah.
can code. Anybody can illustrate. And then
Yeah.
it's a question of what are you? Do you wiggle, do you wiggle technique, right? Which is wiggling a brush is technique. So if you don't need the technique, what's left?
Yeah.
Inspiration, love, putting up a mirror to society and saying, is this who we are? Self-reflection,
Yeah.
enlightenment. That's what's left. So either we degrade into war and chaos and all kinds of really bad stuff, and that probably will happen for a while. We're basically there right now.
That's quite depressing. But I
Yes.
think to your friend though, yeah, I think the question is, I've seen this with writers specifically. I think sometimes writers attach their sense of self-worth or their belief in their own skills to the low level job of writing,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm really good at
Yeah.
forming sentences
Yeah.
that are compelling. Actually, the thing that the most impactful writers do, I think, is they have an idea worth sharing
Yes.
or a story worth sharing that adds some value to humanity. The actual sentence structure is a part of that, but it's actually
Yes.
not the most important, impactful thing they ever did anyway. And they
Yes.
maybe just need to attach themselves to that higher sense
Right.
of what is my
Yeah.
purpose? What do I
They're
do
not
here?
copywriters. They don't write copy, right? They're not the thing that they do.
Yeah.
They never were that, right?
No, and for some of those roles, like marketing copywriters, like certainly the challenge with the way AI works, and I don't know if this will ever change too much, is it's only going to produce the kind of things that the average well-informed person will produce. It's never going to produce something that unique. In the world of marketing, you need something unique, right? The more
Yeah.
derivative your marketing message is, the less people
Yeah.
are going to pay attention to it.
But if you think about it, it's a statistical model that is looking at averages. And like what a neural network is literally a statistical model with a lot
Yeah.
of bells and whistles. Like we'll lose all our listeners if I start talking about math, but that's all it is. It's a statistical predictive model.
Yeah.
End of story. There is no magic in AI. In fact, it's not AI, it's neural networks. It's two generative neural networks, one classifier, one generative, that basically decided that each other were kind of okay. That's all generative is. So if all we have is a statistical model, I don't know, but according to my understanding of mathematics, statistical models are not creative.
Yeah.
They have the illusion of creativity, but they're not creative.
I think I'm with you on the changes to the job market. I think we saw this, we talked about spreadsheets before, right?
Yeah.
But like where spreadsheets and Excel come from, people don't kind of know. These used to be actual huge pieces of paper or whiteboards or blackboards. And it was people's job. Like, when you change a cell in Excel and the other cells recalculate, like entire firms, they've had people, the full-time job was like, you change that thing, I'm going to go and rub this out and I'm going to calculate the new thing and put it here, right? And that's how businesses were run. Well, of course, the spreadsheet comes out and overnight that job just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But that job, like the people doing that job went on to find other much more impactful things that they could do anyway. It increased productivity of the country, so that will happen. I think there's going to be a devastating loss though on the side of investors. I think investors are going to lose so much money in this AI craze.
Here's because they invest in basically tinfoil wrappers, or because they're going to lose their power. What's your reasoning?
I think I feel like, do you remember a few years ago we had this sort of boom of like company valuations, right? Every company was
it
sort of
happens
worth
every 10 years.
30x revenue. Yeah. And now the other thing that happened though is anything that looked remotely like a software company got valued like a software company.
Yeah.
So if you say, like Microsoft is creating Windows, and every copy of Windows they sell doesn't cost them anything. They could sell 1 billion copies. They could sell 3 copies. Yeah, there's no cost of goods sold. That's the thing that always underwrote software company valuations, because if my gross margin is 90%, I can do that thing all day and my cost structure doesn't go up. AI is totally the opposite of that. So the idea of like,
explain why. This is brilliant. Explain why.
Well, the cost. So let's say, right. So today you have an assistant, and they cost you a bunch of money to have this assistant do basic tasks for you. And you say, oh, AI can do that. There's an AI agent that will do that. So the investors get really excited. Oh, the whole PA industry is going to disappear, and this company doing AI stuff is going to make all this money. Well, the problem is going to be you're going to charge $30 a month or something for this assistant, maybe more. every question that gets asked has to be answered through running everything through that neural network you described. There's a huge hardware cost with that. And what you see today in a lot of AI companies is huge variance in those costs, but it's
Yeah.
usually the gross margins. The gross margins are not 90%, they're not 80%. They're typically like at best 40%, and
We're
at worst
adding
negative
variable
100,
costs into
200%.
software processing. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah,
We're significantly increasing variable cost. Like that's
yes,
one. So that's huge. That's brilliant. I haven't heard anybody say that. That's really insightful. Here's the other problem. We're also eliminating barrier to entry in software businesses. So
yeah,
hypothetically, over the next 2 to 3 years, if vibe coding gets good enough, the barrier to entry in software, excluding distribution, excluding sales, excluding relationship, just software. So the only barrier of entry, which is in the IP itself, is calculated by the months taken to develop that IP.
mm,
Now, with the introduction of vibe coding that actually works, what if that 5 years of software can be created in 5 minutes? What happens is your barrier to entry from an IP standpoint goes away as long as the intellectual property associated to the domain expertise is not mystical. So
yeah.
there's some caveats here. There's some salt that we need to kind of put over it.
We
But
should come back
there's,
to that. I do, I kind of agree, but I actually disagree a little bit with that. But I think, yeah, the fundamental challenge for these AI companies is it's a very different economic model where
yes.
they're assuming it's going to have software level multiples, and I just don't see it. Do you remember during the COVID period there was that company, it was a large US company that did like Peloton, it was, like
Oh yeah.
you're
Oh yeah.
cycling
They
at home,
went
right?
up and then went down.
Everyone got a Peloton. Now,
Everybody went. We did
they
too.
looked like a software company, right? Because they were on
They
the
did.
internet. So they
Fair
got
enough.
software company multiples. At one point, they had 4 billion in revenue, and they were worth like $50 billion, right?
That's
Do you know what their
crazy.
gross margin was at the time? 40%, the same as
Sheesh.
these AI companies at best. Most AI companies are losing money on.
Yeah.
So imagine like that's your like anyone should have been able to look at
I'm
that
sorry.
and
They were a
say,
media company. Let's just agree that they were a media company. They were
yeah,
not
but
a software
with
company.
physical hardware that had to get shipped to you, like
Well,
that's
there was
not
the
the
Peloton
same as
hack, right?
what was that?
So the Peloton hack is where you just get the app and you use any old bike.
All right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's still, I don't know, the cost of goods sold on that thing wasn't like a software product was. And so the more customers they add, they're making very little profit on that. And so what are they worth today? I think today they're worth like 3 billion or something. They're
Yeah.
worth, and the
That's
revenue's gone down, and their gross margins have actually improved, but people realize this is not a software company, right?
yeah.
So I think most of these AI companies are not software companies. They have really high cost of goods sold on the thing. That's why I think investors are going to lose a lot of money. On software though, so I think there's something, if you think about the act of product creation, right? The only reason you create a product in the first place is you think that there's a better way to solve the problem than all
Right.
the current ways that currently exist to solve the problem, right? You've got this sort of
Right.
unique insight.
10x kind of in the VC approach. Yes.
Yeah, if we could just bring this new technology that's come about, that will solve the problem better,
Yeah.
or just a new way of thinking about and framing the problem,
Right.
will solve the problem better. And then over time, that gets you that initial insight, you embody the knowledge into the product. People use the product, they give you feedback on it,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
continually kind of innovating, and
Yeah.
it takes this sort of evolutionary pathway
Right.
where it
That's
gets more
your
valuable over
domain
time.
IP, not your software IP. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's like if Atlassian disappeared tomorrow, there's still a lot of really clever things that they figured out with Jira in the
Yeah.
act of asking how do we build a better way of managing work that needs to be
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
where humanity could kind of recreate the
Yeah.
solutions to that. But in doing it, like they have a very high moat. Like if you want to start a bug tracking product today,
Yeah.
you're going to spend 5 years and tons of engineers just building all the table stakes stuff that Jira already has before you even get to build something innovative. Or you have to have something that's so innovative, people aren't going to ask for
Yeah.
where's your SOC compliance, why doesn't it
Right.
integrate with ServiceNow,
Yeah.
all the enterprise table stakes that come with it. And I don't see that coming out of like the coding movement, really.
Yeah.
And almost like the evidence would sort of suggest it's not going to happen because this stuff's now been around for a few years and these companies haven't been built yet. So
So we probably will disagree. Here's if you have one atom on one side of a river in Switzerland, I think it was, and you can literally teleport that atom to the other side of the river. That's all you can do now, right? That's physically possible today. Obviously, you're destroying the atom and recreating the information on the other side. What's the difference in creating a molecule from one side of the river to the other? What's the difference in creating a molecule from here to the moon? What's the difference if you can do a molecule from here to the moon? What's the difference in creating a frog from here to the moon?
Well, hold
What's
on,
the
though. I
difference in
think,
creating a human? Now, the famous saying was, I don't care about this anymore because it's no longer a physics problem. It's an engineering problem. So
yeah.
my argument would be that, sure, vibe coding doesn't work today, but how far are we from solving that engineering problem?
Well, no, but I think okay, we talked about there's a low level way of describing a thing and a high level way. So the low level way of describing software development is I type code and the code
Mm,
compiles, right?
right,
The high level understanding of what programmers do, what the good programmers do, is they find creative ways to solve problems in a better way than they'd previously
right,
been solved.
right.
And they're continually finding those ways of doing it. That's, to me, that's what software development is.
Yes,
So I think it's quite different to the sort of atom going up to molecules problem, because it's not scaling up. Like Jira is not more code thrown at the prompt of, like, if you said, today create me a bug tracker and GPT
yeah,
spits out 400 lines of code. Creating Jira is not a case of that same GPT spitting out 500,000 lines of code. It's actually 500 more prompts that you need
yes,
to give it.
yes.
It's
It's
500 more
iterations.
ways of
Yes,
thinking about the thing.
today.
Now,
Yes,
like, if you said, okay, so for me as a software developer, what was the hardest part about being a software developer? It was never writing the code. I learned
no,
I
it's
learned to code as a
understanding the
kid. It was
iterations.
easy. It's
Yes,
actually, it was the people, it's the user. So if you start from the premise of, like, if there's an imaginary universe where you say the user perfectly understands their problem and the best possible way it might be solved, and they
yeah,
can
that's not true.
express that clearly and succinctly,
That's
and
never
then the
that's never
hardest
going to
part
be
about
true.
software development is turning that into code. Like, that was not the
That's
problem.
never true. No,
The,
that's
the
never been
whole
the problem.
agile movement was actually the user doesn't know what they want, and that's
Yes,
totally okay. And they don't know
yes,
what's possible. The job of the programmer is to bridge that. So
yes. So, but
yeah,
here's the thing, right? Let's talk about economics and let's talk about supply and demand.
mm,
If a task that if all else equals, sorry, and we're going into economic terms, so I'm going to apologize to the audience, but we'll try and keep it as simple as possible. All else equals, meaning if we don't change any other parameter, and a job is 10 times easier to be done,
yep,
then you're significantly increasing the amount of people who can do it,
yes,
meaning you're increasing supply 10x. If
yep,
you're increasing supply 10x with all else equals, meaning demand, the number of jobs that need to be done, what that means is that your price or salary or whatever for that or unemployment is going to increase significantly. Unemployment, the price is going to go significantly down because now my 13-year-old son can do the job because
yep,
he has the mental capacity to do these iterative logics in his head. However, he hasn't spent 10 years practicing a programming language, but he doesn't need to do that anymore because all
yep,
he has to do is logical iterations. And then he can visually see what it creates. And so he's really not learning C, C++, which is what I learned as a child. Now he's
mm,
learning prompt engineering and he's learning software architecture, which he has to feed into the prompt. So he has to
yep.
say, oh, this is the design pattern I want to use. So I
I
mean,
think that's
that
totally
in
right.
itself is fundamentally problematic. If we are changing supply and demand by a factor of 10, 100,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
catastrophic.
yeah. Maybe, we had this with programming, right? So we went from low level languages to high level languages.
Yes.
We also saw an increase in the number of programmers, and there was also more demand for programmers too, as we could
Yes.
see what programs were capable of doing. So,
Yes.
and and there were periods of boom and bust with that, right? Like the sort
Yes.
of the old joke of, like, through the .com boom was, some 13-year-old coming in, running the company or something.
Yes. Well, that
Uh,
happened with Facebook, right? I'm 13, but pretty much.
yeah, yeah. So there will be that boom and bust. I think generally, I don't know, maybe it's going to be a return to, if you read about, like, the old scientists from, like, the 1700s, and they weren't just kind of focused on one thing. Like, someone wasn't just a
Mm,
physicist, they were also a mathematician, and all the knowledge was kind of available,
yes.
because the amount of
Yes.
knowledge was less than today. And then more recently we have these sort of hyper specialized roles. I think, you know if you ever watch old time woodworkers using hand tools or something. You watch that stuff and you think like, I just don't have the patience to learn all of that. But you know what? I can go down to the hardware store and I can buy a circular saw and a drill, and I can create a table that's, not going to be as beautiful as pretty or anything, but it will be
Sure.
functionally good.
Yes.
So there's probably arguably more woodworkers today. There are more humans on the planet capable of crafting something of utility out of wood
Beautiful.
than there previously were
So let's
because of the
break
tooling.
down your argument because it's brilliant. Because I want this to be so clear. Because this is, I think your argument A is true. I completely agree with it. And I left you a way to kind of punch my argument down because I said all else equals.
Mm,
All else is not equals. It
mm,
never is. All it is all else equals, right, is a tool for economists to do modeling. That's all it is. All else is never equals.
yeah.
So what I think you're right. And I think what we're going to see is, first of all, there's going to be a dip. There's going to be a crash. I'll tell you why. Because everybody's going to take a bath, right? In economic terms, they're going to want to do basically an accounting bath. They're going to want to show that they've cut all these costs, that they're hyper productive, hyper efficient, hyper profitable. They're going to want their stock prices to jump up. Like, okay, so when we stop being greedy, we'll figure out that there's massive demand. So now productivity is increased 100 fold. Sure, supply went down, demand was held equal, but then demand is going to go out of control. Now,
Mm,
here's a few reasons why. If I'm an IT company, I have no developers. I'm any company. I'm a B2C company, any company, gas, oil, chemicals, pharma. I don't have a engineering team, a software engineering team. If my IT person, my accountant, my head of design can now vibe code, why wouldn't they? So what I'm arguing is the
yeah.
resurgence of in-house development teams, except they're not going to be developers. They're not going to be engineers. They're going to be anybody.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a massive explosion of in-house development. Now, if you're developing in-house, now it's not one SaaS software, Calendly or Salesforce that's servicing thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers. Now you have IT people 10, not 1,000, because you don't need 1,000. Maybe you have 5 or 10. Now you have 5 or 10 IT people who are coding in vibe coding in every single company in the world.
Mm.
So from, sure, demand, is held the same, supply completely crashes, right? But then suddenly demand explodes. That's my hypothesis of what the future holds. Now, let's come back in 3, 4, 5 years and see if I was right or not, but it feels right to me.
I think so. I mean, I think, and we've probably historically seen that, right? Like, if you ever remember seeing
Yes.
when IntelliSense came around, right? Like autocomplete as you're coding. So for people who don't know, we used to read books about how to write a program, and then we would type in letter for letter, and you would type every single letter that appeared on the screen. And then, at some point the internet came around so we could copy and paste the code, but you still had to write all of it. And then the tools that we used to write programs in started getting this ability to, as you would type the word, foo, it would auto-complete what the suggestions would be, just like on your phone when it's
Yeah.
auto suggesting things, right?
Yes.
And I remember this article at one point that was like arguing that this rots the minds of programmers. Like programmers are going to be dumber because they won't learn what the entire function to do a thing with the mouse in Windows is, because they're just going to remember the first 3 letters of it, and the autocomplete will do it, and they'll get
Yeah.
dumber as a result. What history kind of showed is actually it just allowed more people to become programmers and
Yes.
less people spending time memorizing the stuff, and more
Yes.
people doing, I think, with the high level job of what programming is, which is just solving problems. So I'd almost argue that if you end up with a networking engineer here and an IT admin here and a former accountant that just started doing some vibe coding over here,
Yeah.
and they are spending all day in the purpose of solving problems better through
Yes.
the creation of software, and that software just happens to be vibe coded, or they are
Yeah.
programmers anyway.
They
They're
are.
just using different
Yeah.
tooling to do it, but they're
That's
still
right.
programmers. They're still
They are.
doing the job of programming.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
again, if your entire sense of self-esteem of like, I'm a good developer because I memorized the name of this function in Windows,
Yeah. That's a problem.
that 10 years ago, you probably realized that wasn't that important. Today, the fact that you can write code that perfectly compiles, that shouldn't be the thing to hang yourself on anyway. What you should be really, your sense of self-esteem should be, I'm really good at solving problems
Yeah.
that people present to
But
me.
Paul, what horrifies me? That's not how a lot of VP or CTOs hire. A lot of the CTOs and VPs, they ask, "Oh, do you know the jargon? Oh, do you
Mm,
know the API?" Because they haven't figured out the fundamental truth in what you're saying, that you should be asking, "Can you solve a problem?"
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you don't know the jargon. It matters if I gave you, so let's say you don't know what jargon is for mutexes. I don't know what mutex is, but if I give you two loops that can happen in parallel and have a common shared data, can you tell me three problems that happen due to this? And you can spit out the problems. I shouldn't care if you know what mutexes are.
That's
I
right.
shouldn't.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
I hear time and time again, how do you measure your programs? Oh, if they know the jargon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shortcut, right? Like if they know this, then they probably maybe know how to solve the problems, but we don't have a good way of
Well, how
validating, can
fast
we?
will they solve a problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I can read a book and I can learn the jargon. Can I necessarily become great at solving problems faster than anybody else?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
answer is no. So I don't know. When I hear CTOs saying that, it horrifies me because I know a lot of great programmers who know the jargon, but they are basically savant, right? They are sure they're sometimes antisocial, but my Celebrite programmers, some of them could decrypt 10 phones in the same time that another programmer could do one,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I hired the team that hacked the Apple machine, right? So
Yeah.
we could hack that. We gave that FBI, CIA, NSA. Everybody bought it from us, the Met Police. I hired that team. So I look at those programmers and I'm like, they could do something that nobody else could do. So why do I care if they know or don't know jargon?
That's right.
Everybody
And
knows jargon, right?
I think it's what people maybe don't, especially people who consider themselves good programmers because they've got really good technical skills or knowledge of how to code and so on, is so if you think about like there's a VP, I've said this internally sometimes when I'm hiring people who for a specific expertise, I say like actually so law is a good one, right? So have you ever had this experience if you've ever had to go to a lawyer, you say to the lawyer, hey, I've got this problem, right? I've got this contract I'm trying to do. And you give them the contract and the contract is 20 pages. And what you get back is 30 pages of advice from them, right? And the conversation I've often had with lawyers is, okay, I've got business problems. I don't have legal problems. I have business problems. But I operate in a framework where the law exists.
Is a thing.
If I was a legal expert, I would be a total weapon in solving my business problems because I would know what I could and couldn't do in the law.
How many
But in the
lawyers
absence
have
of
you
that,
met that meet your criteria?
none. It's very hard. I haven't quite found someone yet. Right.
So
But
if you would have told me one, I would say, can I have his or her name?
yeah.
It's because
I think
every business person in the world wants what you described.
yes. Yeah, and that applies for every function. So you would say like, I'm the head of revenue at this company or something. I have business problems. And if I was also an amazing coder, I could use coding to solve a lot of those problems. And that's the thing I'm paying you for, Mr. or Mrs.
Brilliant.
Programmer. I'm paying you to solve my problems by exploiting your knowledge of how to do these arcane things on a. But don't lose sight of the fact that that's what I'm paying you for. I'm not paying you to code. I'm paying you to solve my problems because you have this expertise,
Yes.
And so if you're wondering why you got a bad performance review, despite writing really good code that compiles and all your unit tests pass, that's the problem.
Paul, you are absolutely brilliant. This is not how most people work. Like most people, if the coders, engineers, developers, whatever, built what they were told to build and it works, they're doing a great job. Even if it doesn't work, they're not going to be fired. Maybe not in your organization, but most organizations, the engineers, even if they actually build stuff that fails all the time at customers, they're still not going to be fired.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a question here in the future about what does it mean to write code? What does quality mean? What does vibe coding mean? And I think what your fundamental question that you asked at the beginning to your daughter, I'm a firm believer that answers don't matter.
Yep.
Answers don't matter because tomorrow there's going to be a different answer. But questions matter fundamentally because what you asked your daughter is you asked her, who are you? What are you? Why does what you do matter? And you asked it in the most simplest of ways. What does it?
Yep. Yeah. And what's the highest level answer to it and the lowest level answer to it, and focus on the high level thing. So here's if you're a good programmer today, and let's say that you're dabbling with AI tools and you're finding that they make you more productive, what do you do with that productivity boost that you've got, right? Do you spend it writing more code, or do you spend it spending more time with the customer to understand their problems better? there's this book,
Paul,
Domain
I don't
Driven
like where
Design.
you're going with this because I'm a product leader.
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe the programmers of the future are a bit more product oriented and less code oriented. But
Yeah.
there's this book, Domain Driven Design by Eric Evans, and it's a sort of popular book within the software community as people get more advanced in their programming
Yes.
skills.
Yes.
And what it does is the first part of the book talks about the importance of deeply understanding the problem domain that you're working
Yes.
in, right? So
Yes.
you want to go and meet the people doing the job that you're
Yes.
coding for.
Yes.
And when they use a strange word that you haven't heard before, double click and try and understand what exactly it
Yes.
means and why they aren't using a different
Yeah.
word, because there's
So
a
double
reason
click
they're
in the
using it.
context, this is a very engineering term you're using. Double click
Yeah.
in this context means use the why technique in
Yeah.
order to
Keep asking.
understand deeply into what is actually happening here.
Yeah. So
Paul,
what happens though with this
I can't
book?
believe I'm going to do this. I'm cutting you off because
Yep.
we're at the end of our hour and I have another guest in a minute. So you're getting a third invite. That is the first time ever this show has ever happened. This is
I love to do it.
Paul, you are brilliant. We haven't even talked about risk and compliance,
No.
which we really should have. But that's what you get when you have a curious host and a brilliant guest.
Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.